Types of cells in the brain. Well, we'll start with the one that gets all the attention. Neurons. And that's, this is the cell body of this neuron, and then here is its axon, and we'll talk about that more. Well, why do neurons get all the attention? It's because they are the ones that communicate electrically and using neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are often in the news, things like dopamine if they're talking about drug addiction, glutamate for learning and memory, also drug addiction, serotonin talking about depression, GABA talking about alcohol addiction, etc. So these are some of the neurotransmitters you've heard of, and of course acetylcholine and epinephrine. So let's go ahead and highlight the neuron in yellow. What we're highlighting right now, these are dendrites coming off of the cell body, that would be the nucleus, and then something that is important in understanding the flow of electrons through the neuron is the axon right here. And that little roll around it right there represents myelin, which is fat, and that's what insulates axons so that the electricity can make it all the way to the end of this long axon. A human has over 100 billion neurons in their brain. Believe it or not, you had more when you were first born, but then as they develop strong connections with these axon terminals, then they prune away the ones that they don't need. More is not always better in the case of the number of neurons. However, it does appear that more connections between the neurons that exist is very important in how well you can solve problems and remember things. So, it's a neuron. Oops. So, a couple of interesting things. There are over 100 billion of these. Now, the remainder of the types of brain cells you have are called glial cells. And the glial cells are far more numerous than the neurons, especially this one right here. This is an astrocyte. Let's highlight it in green. There are probably 200 billion astrocytes in your brain. And it turns out that human astrocytes are bigger than, for example, mouse astrocytes. In March of 2013, a new study just came out about scientists that put human astrocytes into mice brains, and those mice perform much better on memory tests. So our astrocytes are doing some pretty special things that we don't understand in total yet. Okay, so this is an astrocyte. We'll call this glial cell. Just so that you remember, this is a glial cell, not a neuron. And astro means star, and cyte means cell. So this literally means star cell. It gets that name because it has so many projections coming off. So this is the most numerous type of cell in your brain. It is important in monitoring and regulating the chemical environment around neurons. It seems to also play an important role in the amount and even type of neurotransmitters made by neurons. I'll put a question mark there. It's something that they're studying currently. Another important thing about astrocytes is that they are important in synaptic recycling of neurotransmitters. I'm going to put another question mark there, even though I'm pretty certain that that's established, but it's like you find it in some sources, but not in others. So we'll still just put a question mark. It seems that astrocytes are pretty much the hottest area of brain research right now. If an astrocyte dies, then the neurons that are near it will die too. So for example, in Alzheimer's, they see a significant decrease in the number of astrocytes and the neurons around them as well. Okay, another job of astrocytes, I'll put it over here because I ran out of room right there, so still with your green pen though, is that they help form the blood-brain barrier. Basically what the blood-brain barrier is cells and structures that decrease the ability of substances to get to the neurons. It protects them. So if you have poison in your blood, hopefully that poison won't be able to get to your neurons. And that's the blood-brain barrier. Okay, while we're over here, we could look at the blood-brain barrier a little more carefully. You can use a pink highlighter for this capillary here. This could represent blood that's coming up that came up the neck to supply nourishment to your neurons. It's a capillary at this point. Brings goodies such as glucose to the brain. Brain needs a lot of glucose. It has a very high metabolism. So the capillary brings glucose and other goodies. But the blood-brain barrier inhibits entry into tissue by most substances. So if someone is going to be prescribed an antidepressant, that drug has been very specifically designed to be able to get past the blood-brain barrier. And then there are some things that naturally can get past the blood-brain barrier, such as alcohol. Okay, then there's something else that's going on if we think about the blood supply to the brain. What if I told you that this space right here is a ventricle? Oh, let's just say the lateral ventricle. Then you know that there has to be CSF in there, right? And you might remember that the way that CSF got in was from the blood. So fluid moved in to the ventricle from the capillaries, but not any of the blood cells, not the red blood cells or the white blood cells, just the plasma-like fluid, goes into the ventricle, and then it gets circulated by another type of glial cell, these columnar-shaped glial cells. We'll color those in blue. And they are ciliated. They have cilia on them that do the wave to circulate CSF. And these are called ependymal cells. Ependymal cells. It's interesting, there aren't a lot of cells in your body that have cilia. Ependymal cells have cilia and do the wave. And then in your trachea and your bronchi, there are cilia on those cells that help to move mucus up. And then if you're a female, the fallopian tubes have cilia that help to move the egg along every month after it's been ovulated. And then I guess you could sort of say how we hear, those hair cells, but they're not technically cilia, but they do look a little bit like them. Okay, next up, we'll look at the white blood cells of the brain. They're given a special name because they're the smallest of the glial cells. They're called microglia. Now, I just got done telling you that white blood cells can't enter the brain, or they shouldn't normally enter the brain through the blood-brain barrier. But these ones got in before the blood-brain barrier developed. And I'll tell you about that. Let's write this first, though. Microglia, the white blood cells of the brain. So they engulf debris and pathogens, although we would hope that mostly the brain is sterile and doesn't have any pathogens in it. So during fetal development, little cells that were beginning to form other types of blood cells began to migrate in your body, and they went up to your brain, and then they were already in your brain as the rest of the brain formed around it. And so those are the microglial cells that ended up staying. So they're if you were to look at them, the cells or the proteins inside of them, they would be similar to the white blood cells that circulate in your blood, and yet you could tell that they are different too. So it's like a distant relative. Okay, now let me just recap real quick. So neurons fire electrical signals. They fire the action potentials. Maybe we should write that. Fire the APs. And that's why they get all the attention, because they're hot stuff. Everyone's paying attention to them. Okay, then you've got the quiet behind-the-scenes workers. And in fact, maybe the boss of everything, the astrocyte. Who knows exactly how much control it has compared to a neuron. But you've got these other cells that are important for other jobs besides firing action potentials. So astrocytes are one of them, ependymal cells are another, microglial cells are another, and then we've got the super cool insulating cells. And they have two names. In the brain, they're usually referred to as oligodendrocytes. So oligodendrocyte. It's all one word, but you can kind of think of it with three syllables or three set parts to it. Oligodendrocyte. Oligo means few, dendro means fingers, cyte means cells. So few finger cells. And that is a reference to the fact that they do have processes, but not the same amount when you look at them compared to something like an astrocyte. So this picture shows you a hint of what these oligodendrocytes are doing. Do you see how their projections wrap around the axon of the neuron? And then down here, they're actually wrapping around another neuron. And then there would be another one over here, wrapping here. Another one here. So it might take several of these oligodendrocytes to fully insulate the axon of a neuron. So everywhere you see this myelin wrapping, you know that there's an oligodendrocyte somewhere nearby. Let's do it like this. Okay, so the oligodendrocyte is the name of this cell, and then what it wraps the axon in is called myelin. The myelin sheath. Insulates the axon, so the action potential can reach the axon terminals, or the end of the axon. Now in the peripheral nervous system, or in other words in your nerves, those axons are usually myelinated too, and they're called Schwann cells. So the oligodendrocytes are in the CNS, and the Schwann cells are in the PNS. I don't know why I put that in quotes, just like that. So this is in the CNS. The Schwann cells are in the peripheral nervous system, or in other words, in the nerves. And a student once gave me the great idea that the way to remember that Schwann cells are wrapping axons in fat is to remember that the Schwann company brings great ice cream. And of course, good ice cream is very high in fat. None of this low-fat stuff if you want truly creamy ice cream. Okay, so then there's a disease that you should definitely know about called multiple sclerosis. And what this actually means, sclerosis means a hardening. And so as the disease progresses, they see fibrosis, multiple areas of like scar tissue on axons where there used to be myelin. So this is a demyelinating disease. And if you know anyone that has this disease, you'll know that they start to lose the ability to move their muscles as they choose. They also start to have a lot of muscle fatigue, vision problems, things that require myelinated axons. So this is a demyelinating disease, and it is autoimmune in nature. And what that means is that the person's own white blood cells are attacking the myelin sheath and destroying it. And then as the fat is removed from the axons, the electrical signal can't successfully make it to the end of the line.